All right, so yeah, I'm going to be presenting on Bolt 12 Prisms. It's a CLN plugin. Thank you, Teresa, for the introduction. I wanted to share a little bit about how I got here. A little over a year ago, I had never written any code, but I had gone deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and just wanted to figure out some way to contribute to the community. And I kept hearing about how there's need for developers and just decided to start learning how to do that on my own. And so I mostly self-taught and ended up going to the Bitcoin conference in Austin a couple months ago, and was lucky enough to join a hackathon team and get to work on this project. And so now I'm here presenting on it. So Bolt 12 Prisms are a CLN plugin, and they're designed for splitting payments and essentially automating your cash flows. So what we're going to talk about is what a Lightning Prism is. Going to go over the Roijubiv stack demo. That's what Derek was referring to. The difference between Bolt 12 and LNURL and why we decided to create this as a plugin using Bolt 12. A little bit about the plugin architecture, some use cases, and then future plans. So I think it was around in March, Dergigi wrote an article on Lightning Prisms, and in there he gives credit to Mr. Kukks, who came up with the idea of Lightning Prisms. And in that article, Dergigi says, one aspect that is still massively underutilized is the programmability of Bitcoin. And this was really made apparent to me when I started working on plugins, because a plugin is just something that you can, it's extra functionality that you can add to a C Lightning node. And you can essentially, with the node, you can send and receive payments, but in between, you can do whatever you'd like to do. Like there's a plugin that you can, whenever you receive a payment, you can publish that to a Nostr relay and see that in your DMs. And so that's why we chose to create Bolt 12 Prisms as a plugin. So the idea explained by Dergigi is that a prism is identified by a Lightning address or similar. So in our case, we ended up using Bolt 12. A prism has one or multiple recipients. So you can imagine the payment comes in one side and then gets split out to one or multiple recipients on the other. And then also another prism can be one of the recipients. Because a prism is just identified by a Bolt 12 offer, as long as the node that's running that offer can interpret that offer as a prism, then that offer can just be one of the members of the prism. So when it gets paid, it ends up splitting out to another prism, and that's what creates prismception. And then splits are defined programmatically, so essentially each member within the prism just gets a relative split. So say like Alice gets 25% and Bob gets 75%. So anytime a payment comes in, then that is automatically split out in those ways to the prism members. Two problems that Dergigi mentions are fees. So because there's one payment that comes in, but multiple payments get sent out. And then also privacy, and he was referring to the problem of privacy in respect to Lightning addresses because they're IP based. And so I think with Bolt 12 we can solve this privacy issue, and the way that we've designed the plugin, we've come up with a way that's not completely implemented, but that we can solve the problem of fees. And Dergigi, towards the end of the article, asks, are Lightning addresses the right level of abstraction for Lightning Prisms? My answer would be no. I think Bolt 12 is the right abstraction. So I was hoping to do a little demo with some volunteers, so we'll see how that goes with the Roijubiv stack demo. So this is deployed, Derek deployed this Roijubiv stack, which using his software, Sovereign Stack, or he deployed roijubiv.guide. And then he also created the Roijubiv stack, which is a Docker stack that deploys everything needed for Prisms. So it deploys a Bitcoin node, a Lightning node with the Prism plugin, and the Roijubiv UI. And it's designed to be used for testing or production purposes. So you can specify the network that you want your nodes to run on and the number of nodes. So in this case, we are running 5 nodes. And actually, in preparation for another event that's going on at the conference, Derek managed to get Roijubiv stack to deploy 200 Lightning nodes. So the first 5 are used for prisms, and then the remaining are going to be used at the conference. So if anyone wants to be involved with this demonstration, you could go to royjibiv.guide/demo. I'll need 4 volunteers. So I don't know if anyone wants to raise your hand. And all right, you can be Alice, Carol, Dave, and one more. All right, you can be Aaron. So if you go to royjibiv.guide/demo, then you will see the connection information for these 5 nodes. So the kind of architecture of this Prism is going to be Bob is running a Lightning node that has the Prism plugin and capability to split payments. Then Alice will be paying Bob's Bolt 12 offer, and then that will get split out to Carol, Dave, and Aaron. So we've got Alice, Carol, Dave, and Aaron in the audience, and I am going to be Bob. And so if you go, we've got what you'll do is click on the link for whoever you were assigned. So this will open up an instance of Clams Wallet connected to that node that we have deployed. And I'm going to go to royjibiv.money, and here, this is some Clams tech, which is the cool thing about working with open source is you get to integrate all sorts of different technology. Let's see. So you can, this is the same thing that's happening with, when you click on each of these links, it's connecting directly to the node, but that gets encoded into the URL. So you just need the connection address, the rune, and then the WebSocket proxy. And so once we are connected, hoping this works, alright, well, this might not work. Were you guys able to connect to each of your Clams wallets? Alright, so I can just open up Bob, and I've already created an offer on Bob's wallet. So here you can see I'm connected to Bob, and this offer here will this represents a Prism that you could go to royjibiv.money and create, but I wasn't able to get connected. So here this represents a Prism, and so when this gets paid, that Prism has Carol, Dave, and Aaron as members within that Prism. Carol will get a 25% split, Dave will get a 50% split, and Aaron another 25% split. So Alice, could you come and scan this? I think if you're just on the home page of Clams, you should be able to scan it, and then send whatever you want, maybe 1,000 sats, and then our Prism members should get their respective payouts.
1,000 sats. Don't type a note. I'll type that note. Send payment.
So you can see it. Bob got payment received, and then you got payment?
Yeah, 500 sats.
Cool. So these are each, the cool thing about Bolt 12 is that these are each individual nodes, completely self-custodied, and you're just, only the Prism node needs to understand what a Prism is. The rest of the nodes just need to be able to run Bolt 12 and issue a Bolt 12 offer. So when you create a Prism, you just go through and you define each of the members and give them their, you input that member's Bolt 12 offer and their split. And so you can use the royjibiv stack, which if you go to royjibiv.guide/PlebLab, there's a bunch of links there, and there's the GitHub there where there's a bunch of documentation on deploying the Rojibiv stack, and like Derek was saying, it's integrated into Sovereign Stack now as well. So if you want, you can use Sovereign Stack and deploy a CLN node with the Prism plugin and be able to create and receive payments to Prisms. So a little bit about why we chose Bolt 12 versus LNURL. Both of these are reusable, which is sort of necessary for a Prism. At the base level, both of these end up presenting the user with the Bolt 11 invoice, which is just when you end up paying something, you get that QR code, you scan it, and that's a Bolt 11 invoice, but they're not reusable. You can only use that once. And so usually, like, you'll get, you say you want to pay for your beer, and the shop asks their node for an invoice and then presents the invoice to the user, and then you can pay it, but it's not reusable. So we have LNURL and Bolt 12. Bolt 12 is not standard at the moment, but we see it as a better option than LNURL, because with LNURL, you need to not only run a node, but you also need to run a web server that is capable of talking to your node, and there's this kind of annoying back and forth where the client asks the web server, and the web server responds, and then goes back to the client, gets the web server then asks the node for an invoice, and then you also expose your IP, and it's not Lightning native. You're building a web server on top of your Lightning node. Whereas Bolt 12, all you need to do is run your Lightning node like normal and be able to publish that offer, and once you've put out an offer, it's reusable, and that offer can represent a Prism. So as long as you're still running your node with that Prism, then anyone can continue to pay to that Prism. And it all happens over the Lightning network. So when you scan that Bolt 12 offer, it just reaches out over the Lightning network, gets the invoice, and you can pay it. So this is just kind of some examples from bolt12.org of the programmability of Bolt 12. So here is an offer that asks for 100 millisatoshis every minute, but only 3 times. Here's another one that asks for up to 1,000 millisatoshis every 10 days, the first period being January 1st, 2021, and you can pay 1 hour early or up to 60 seconds into the period. And all of this information is encoded into this string or this QR code. So, like I said, the Prism, the plugin is a C Lightning plugin, and every Prism is represented by a Bolt 12 offer. So when you go and you create a Prism, you're creating an offer alongside it, and we store within the nodes database the offer ID and connect it to all of the Prism metadata, which is primarily the members within the Prism. Each member gets a split, a destination, and an outlay. The split we just define as an integer between 0 and 1,000, and those, so say in our example where Carol had 25%, Dave had 50%, and Aaron had 25%, that could be represented as just 1, 2, 1, and then that gets normalized into a percentage. We do support key send just because Bolt 12 is not standard at the moment. So you can only receive to a Prism using Bolt 12, but if you'd like, you can specify key send as the destination type, and you can send that way. However, it's not ideal because you have to expose the node pub key, and Bolt 12 has a lot more programmability to it. And then the outlay is a property on each member that defines how much we owe that member. So that's kind of how we keep track of payouts. And we haven't implemented it yet, but there's the idea of implementing a threshold. So each member could have a certain threshold and say you won't pay out a member until they've accumulated 1,000 sats. And so we keep track of that on the outlay. So anytime a payment comes in, we increase their outlay, and once their threshold has been met, then we can pay out. And we can also keep track of failed payments this way, because we increment the outlay and then attempt to pay out, but if it fails, then they'll still have that amount in their outlay. So then the next time we retry a payment, we make sure that we pay each member what they're owed. And then each prism also is connected to an offer. That's the receiving offer for that prism. And the plugin exposes 4 RPC methods. So there's create prism for creating prisms, list prisms to show all of the prisms on your node, update prism to change the member metadata within each specific prism, and delete prism. There is a little caveat with delete prism. You can't technically delete offers. You can disable them, but you can never re-enable them. And then because the offer description gets encoded into the offer itself, you can never create the exact same offer again. So say you create a prism and you label it PlebLab and you delete it, then that will just disable the offer and you won't be able to create another prism and name it PlebLab. So I'm sure there's a way around this, but I haven't figured that out yet. And so this is what it looks like. Bolt 12 offer comes in and then splits out to each of the members. And if you run list prisms, this is sort of what you'll see. And here I've created the example of a band. So say there's a band playing and they want to post an offer to accept tips. Rather than having to tip each band member or say put out a tip jar and then at the end of the night the band splits up all the tips, you just create this one offer, which is represented here by this bolt 12 string. And we've put the lead singer in with a split of 5, the drummer in with a split of 2, and the guitarist with a split of 3. So now whenever this offer gets paid, each one of these members will automatically get split out to. And then you can also see probably the drummer and the guitarist had some failed payments because their outlays are not 0. And so once their nodes are back online or whatever the problem is, then that will ultimately end up getting paid out. So some use cases for this could be podcasting 2.0. So say you've got an episode and you've got the podcast host and then some guests, and rather than running or using, there are split capabilities in podcasting clients, but you're kind of trusting that client to split out for you. And so instead, the podcast host could run a node with prisms, and then the listeners could just pay that prism and then automatically tip out to each of these members. Or the idea of kind of automating your cash flows within a company. So anytime a coffee is purchased, that coffee, paying for that coffee would be the equivalent of paying an offer. So whenever that offer gets paid, you could automatically pay out employees, or maybe each employee gets their own offer. So instead of splitting out to both employees, just each employee gets their own offer and they receive a 20% split for selling that coffee. The remaining 80% split could go to their working capital, and so then you could, like, this can be a second prism which could pay for coffee beans, cups. If we put in a threshold property, then you could say we'll place an order for cups once this 0.02 Bitcoin threshold has been met, and that would then pay out to a third prism, which would be paying for cups. And then finally, the idea of a multi-author blog, which is what we've got set up with rojibiv.guide. So say the reader is reading one blog and they want to tip just that one blog, then that will get split 50% to the author of that blog. But if there's multiple authors contributing to the platform as a whole, then they deserve some value as well. So then you can split out 50% to the just general blog prism, which would then pay each of the authors. And so you can use commando runes to list prisms on remote nodes. So say there's multiple authors to a blog, and you want to be transparent about the splits. You want to make sure everyone knows you're not updating the splits so that you get all of the funds. Then the person that's running the node can issue a rune that would allow you to list the prisms on that node. And I was hoping to do this from my computer to demonstrate that. See, this doesn't show up very well. But you could just imagine if from any computer, as long as you're connected to that node, then you can list their prisms. And so I was hoping to show you can we have multiple prisms set up for roygibib.guide with splits to each of the authors for that blog post, for that blogging platform. So some future plans are, I mentioned the payment thresholds. So you would wait to pay out a member until a certain amount has been met. And I think the main use case for this would be mitigating fees. And so for managing fees, we can subtract fees from each member's outlay. So once a payment goes through, then you know how much you paid in fees for it, so you can remove that from their outlay. And for managing, for the node operator to be able to accept some fees, CLN recently merged pay to self, so you can create your own offer and add it to the Prism and give yourself a split, like a 1% split. So if you're creating prisms for someone else, then anytime payment comes in, then you would get a fee for that. I don't think it's been released yet, but once they release it, then we hope to add some sort of fee structure. There's the idea of adding an event payment type. So anytime a payment gets split out to this event, this would sort of be like Prism plugins. So instead of just directly paying out, you could trigger some sort of external event that could be paid for with that split. One example would just be paying out to LNURL. And we want to improve the split distribution function. So right now it's just relative splits, but you could have the idea of like priority or mandatory payouts. So for the idea of automating cash flows within your company, you want to make sure all of your coffee beans and coffee cups are paid for before you pay your employees. So you could implement this threshold and priority mandatory payouts where you won't pay any other members within the Prism until like that threshold has been met for coffee beans. And then there's also the idea of decaying splits for, say, a blog post or a blogging platform where the offers lose value over time. The more recent that an offer was created, the more valuable it is. So as long as you're constantly creating content, then you continue to get more of the splits, but the less time that you spend creating content, then the less of that split that you'll get. So, like I said, I've only been doing this for like a year, and so there's a lot of things that I don't know, and so I'd love for other people to contribute and just add to the value of this project. So if you go to the GitHub and within the testing directory, there's a bunch of scripts that I've created, and this is sort of just generally on developing on plugins. So I've created a few things. This is a copy of the startup reg test script from C Lightning, and that will just create a environment for multiple nodes to be connected and test them all on your computer. You can restart. This restart script will stop and start the Prism, because every time you change something, you need to stop and start it within your node. And I've gone through and kind of explained the development process. And so yeah, if anyone wants to contribute, they can also go to roygibib.guide/contribute and follow us on Nostr or join our Telegram. And finally, there's a bunch of links that I've laid out at roygibib.guide/PlebLab. And so you can find the repositories there. Some resources, I created some posts on starting the plugin on your node. So if you're running a C Lightning node and you want to run the plugin, it's fairly straightforward. You just have to clone the code and then start it. And gone through kind of how to use each of the RPC methods. And here's some more links as well. So yeah, and does anyone have any questions?
I'm wondering about like the static nature of it. So if I put up a prism and dynamically be like switching perhaps the members of that prism and the payouts. So if I'm doing that, do I need to like continue re-rendering like the QR code that I'm presenting to people, or is that metadata kind of like kept on the server side?
Yeah,
Like
it's
how does that kind of dynamic versus the static nature of it work?
yeah, the member metadata is just connected to that offer. So but it's not encoded within the offer.
Yeah.
So you can publish the offer, and as long as you still have that offer ID, you can change all of the metadata, and it still is the same offer.
Very cool.
So I have a bit of a two-parter. The first part is, at what point does this stop becoming non-custodial in terms of when the payment's being split? And is there any, like, is Core Lightning planning to support like prisms more fundamentally? Have you talked to them about that?
I don't know about any plans of them supporting Prism specifically. I think Derek was part of the reason that they got pay to self merged in. And as to your first question, it's sort of it's more designed for kind of that trusted community, whereas like with, you have members of a band and you know who's running the node. But if you want to get to the point of like being a Prism service provider and splitting out to anyone that wants to create prisms with you, then that starts to create that custodial environment.
Do you see a way of doing this non-custodially?
Not entirely. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there is a way, but I think you would have to, because as long as you're in control of the node, you're in control of the splits and the members within that prism. So there would have to be a way to kind of, I don't know, you could hash all of the metadata and make sure that that was unchanged, or I don't know exactly how that would work.
Damian, how many people are working on both 12 prisms right now? Is it just you and a couple others?
Yeah, mostly just me and Derek have been working on it. And there's a couple other Prism implementations. There's a BTC Pay Server Prism plugin. I think I saw one written in PHP. I'm not sure exactly how you use that. But so there are some other Prism implementations, but none others that I've seen that use Bolt 12.
With existing services like accounting.fm, they're currently doing revenue splits. Are they using the sort of technology you've already got there, or are they using something else?
I'm not exactly sure what they're doing, but I imagine it's all happening sort of on the client side. So when you create that revenue split, each member puts in their Lightning address, and it will just pay out. Like Fountain will manage paying out to each of those Lightning addresses.
Yeah, the way the Fountain does it is you put all that Lightning addresses in the RSS feed of the podcast. They call it the value block, podcast 2.0, like specification. So then Fountain or any of the apps just look at all the Lightning addresses and they say 10 sats are coming in, let me split them up.
Yeah.
You say that it's not necessarily custodial, but if every participant ran their own, everybody who is split to ran their own C Lightning node with their offer, and they just had a channel open to the Prism node, then really the only thing that they would trust is the split, and that would be essentially fully non-custodial, right?
Yeah, and you can use those. The person running the node could issue the commando rune, and you could continue to verify that they haven't changed the split. And that's the way that we have the Prism set up on royjabiv.guide. Is there's a node running that has direct channels to each of the blog authors, and it just sends directly over that channel.
So it's essentially, it could be non-custodial.
Yeah, as long as you trust the node operator not change the splits.
So just a follow-up question. Since the host of the split is controlling the split of the funds, does that mean you could also put LNURL in front of this and do like LNURL to Bolt 12 split on the other end?
So you could essentially like pay to LNURL and then get that, like trigger an event that would then pay out.
Yeah. Well, do you see a way you can make this interoperable?
Yeah, I am actually starting to work on a LNURL implementation of this, and I was thinking sort of about like creating kind of a Prism spec to make all of the different implementations of Prisms work together. But ultimately, a Prism can just be represented on the server side by a Lightning address, an LNURL, or a Bolt 12 offer. So as long as you have the capability to pay to, like, if there was an LNURL Prism, you could pay to an LNURL from a Bolt 12 Prism, and you wouldn't have to know necessarily that that LNURL is a Prism. It's just once that payment was received, then the server hosting the LNURL would then implement the Prism logic.